Muy buenas, estamos aquí en estas tertulias del Teatro LATEA Remoto, LATEA Remoto Tertulias, and tonight we have a special guest. We always have a special guest, but tonight we have la doctora Carmen Febo from Philadelphia, talking with us. Buenas noches, Carmen, how are you?
I'm very good, and thank you so much, Miguel, for the opportunity.
Well, it's our opportunity. It's not often that we get to speak with the director of such a prestigious engine for culture as Taller Puertorriqueño in Philadelphia has been for so many years. And so I just want to introduce you briefly, Doctora Febo. Carmen Febo-San Miguel harks from Ciales, okay, in the mountains in la Cordillera Central, allá en Puerto Rico. And,
pueblo de Juan Antonio Correger.
Oh, yes, no, we have illustrious people, which we're going to go for a little later on. And she is a medical doctor. She received her MD from the University of Puerto Rico back in the 70s. And she came to Philadelphia for her residency and stayed. She has had some detours, and she went back to Puerto Rico at some point to Naranjito, working there. And basically, she has been very civically engaged throughout the years, not just because of Taller, which she has made her home, and she has extended that home to so many people, but also because she's involved in other causes like voting, women's rights, you name it. So rather than expound on the bio, we're gonna start from the get-go. And I wanted to go back to that Ciales, to the origin, to Ciales. And like you said, there's Don Juan Antonio Correger, great poet, statesman, and freedom fighter. But there's other people, the singer Adalberto Santiago, perhaps more recently, Enrique Coco Vicens, Pachín Vicens, and Juan Figueroa, who's around, the president of the Universal Healthcare Foundation. So talk to us a little bit about Ciales growing up, Carmen.
Well, basically, I was born in Ciales, but my parents moved to, closer to the metropolitan area. But Ciales was always the connection to family. Every holiday, every, major family gathering happened in Ciales, because that's where both my parents, who either were born or grew up in Ciales, so their parents were in Ciales, so my grandparents were all in Ciales. I had cousins and aunts and etc. So that's where, during Holy Week or Mother's Day or Father, every festivity throughout the year, we would go. And then, Ciales, as you know, it's a very central mountain town, and it was very wonderful as a child to be able to run around and, climb trees and eat fruit from the trees. And so, Ciales carries very, very fond memories and about family and fun and, cousins and extended family and parties and big weddings and those kinds of gatherings.
And when you were little, I imagine the trip was an adventure in and of itself, right? Going from San Juan to Ciales.
That is correct. So, we were a family of 5. So it was, we were all cramped in the car, very hot, with no air conditioning. And yes, it was an adventure in itself. And one of the fond memories is that to pass the time, as may be typical in a lot of, Puerto Rican families, we used to sing. And to this day, the collection of, Puerto Rican and Latin American folklore songs that I have in my brain are from those trips. We used to sing danzas, and we used to sing, fun songs. And but that was one of the ways in which we sort of passed the time.
Did you play Veo Veo Que Ves, or you didn't do that?
No, not so much. Okay.
Well, talking about these trips, talking about the family and the origins, I think you have mentioned elsewhere that your parents were very influential, like they tend to be for most of us, and that they instilled in you a love of culture and also of achieving, of doing your best and carrying on. If you could talk to us briefly about your mother and your father, what worlds were they coming from professionally, if they had that profile, or who are who are your parents?
So, my mother was the youngest of a family of 24.
Wow.
That owned some land in Ciales, which is how they, survived. I mean, they didn't have any money, but they had land, and that was, the way that the family was able to sustain itself. By the time my mother was born, the oldest daughter had already married and was already with kids. So one of the things that is particular to me is that my mother's favorite, cousin partner, because by that time, all of the older kids had already, were bigger or older, etc. So she had this special, so-called cousin who was her aunt, and her aunt was younger than her. And that was, something that was, seemed to me very curious when I was growing up. And my grandmother, in order for the youngest kids to be able to go to school, they rented a small house in the town. And my mother was one of the ones that benefit from the ability to then be in town and attend school. So my mother finished high school and then finished, what was called in those days El Normal, to become a teacher, which was like a 2-year degree. But with time, and this is one of the examples, right? My mother, with 5 kids, went back to school and not only finished a bachelor's degree, but finished a master's degree.
Wow.
My father, on the other, is another example, because my father also was not the youngest, but the second to the youngest in a family of 11. And the others...
Una familia pequeñita, la de tu papá.
Pequeñita. And, and again, being poor and in the town of Ciales, where there were very limited opportunities, he finished high school and he started to work, and he, told us this story many, many times, in a bombonera, selling candy. And he made, whatever, I don't know, $5 a week or something. I mean, it was very meager. So he decides to go back to school, and his older sisters, my aunts, were the ones that gathered their little bits of money here and there and were able to support him when he went to school. And he went to Mayagüez, to the engineer college, and became a civil engineer. And, I also remember, which is maybe part of the model that I have of generosity or of giving back, that, for the rest of what I remember, my father religiously every month wrote a check and sent it to both Tia Paquita and Tia Vita, who had supported him throughout those years so that he could finish his engineering degree.
Amazing.
So they instilled that, that sense of achieving and, overcoming obstacles and just going to school. And all of my brothers and sisters were professional and ended, professional careers.
And the move to San Juan, I mean, you were already born and you all moved there, or what propitiated the move to San Juan? Your parents moved to San Juan.
Yeah, it was work. My father was an engineer and started to work with the government, being managing the inspection of roads all over the island, and his office was in Santurce, so they needed to be able to live closer. There's another family history, which is that because my father, before they moved, took a Publico to go to his work, coming back one of those days, the Publico had a really horrible accident. And he ended up with a fracture of his vertebra.
Oh my God.
He, in those days, there was knowledge was limited and whatever. But to make a long story short, he spent like 6 months at Veteran Hospital, in immobilized in bed with these weights, hanging from his neck, until supposedly his vertebra healed. I mean, that wouldn't happen today. That's almost like torture. But that, when both my brother, my older brother, and I were very young, and my mother then, had a very sick husband in the hospital and two very young kids. It was a difficult time.
Oh, wow. And did that in any way influence or affect your decision to then pursue medical studies, to go to medical school, or no? Or this is a different...
No, I mean, maybe it did, but my desire to become a doctor started very, very early, and it could be that it was related to that. But as long as I remember, when I was a little girl and I was asked what I wanted for Christmas as a present, I always asked for a doctor's kit. I always asked for a doctor's kit.
And so you were already in San Juan. The family has established itself in San Juan, at least your nuclear family, mom, dad, and your siblings.
Mm-hmm.
And you went to the University of Puerto Rico, right? And then you go to the medical school, right, of the University of Puerto Rico. And so, what led to your ulterior or eventual decision to go to Philadelphia, to move to Philadelphia?
So
this is 73 or something like that?
73. I graduated from medical school in 1973. So, I wanted to do family medicine, which was a very young field. It had become a specialty. So it wasn't, the so-called generalist or GP or general practitioner was somebody that finished medical school and then did 1 year of internship, and then became a primary care doctor in a town or whatever. But because of the need and because of the field becoming stronger and seen as being much in need, the field developed the what is called the specialized or the specialty of family medicine. So it was a 3-year residency program, like many of the residency programs are, pediatrics and internal medicine, and it had not started in Puerto Rico yet.
So you had to go abroad, or at least come to the States to do the specialization, or...
Correct. I mean, by the time, the following year, it had, it also started in Puerto Rico. But when I was making the decision, it hadn't started. So I decided to come, and I, like many others living in an island, wanted to see, and explore new opportunities and new environments. And as is typical, probably 20 or 25 members of my medical class were going to pursue residencies and trainings outside of Puerto Rico at that time. So actually, I came to Philadelphia with two other colleagues of mine, actually 3 other colleagues of mine, and another guy that wanted to do surgery. So 5 of us were here in Philadelphia.
And I assume, and perhaps I'm wrong, that there must have been other cities in the United States that could have afforded a young doctor just coming out of medical school that specialty that was still new. But so why Philadelphia? Did you choose Philadelphia, or did the city of brotherly love choose you?
Well, it was, a little of both things. I mean, I was looking at an eastern city because it still allows, easy access to Puerto Rico. But I was also looking for a city that had a significant, Puerto Rican and Latino population. So, you're then thinking of New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia, Baltimore maybe, but yeah.
Okay. And reading about you and researching a little bit, it seems that there was a watershed moment around circa 1976 where you went to a concert, produced or sponsored or, by Taller Puertorriqueño, which at that point was a fledgling 3-year-old organization, or correct me if I'm wrong. And you saw Antonio Cabambale performing perhaps for the first time, or just an early iteration of that Puerto Rican anthem that is Verde Luz. And I want to we'll play a snippet of Verde Luz.
La Virgen del Coral, si me ausento de tus playas rumorosas, si me alejo de tus palmas silenciosas, quiero volver a sentir la tibia arena, a dormir en tus riberas, isla mía, flor cautiva.
So you saw this, you heard this, and we just heard a short cut from the song. Talk to us about that moment, that encounter, that, Verde Luz.
So, I mean, Verde Luz obviously has a very special meaning, for all of us, for me, but it was the event, it was it was coming to the United States, and not, even though, I mean, the residency program was connected to this clinic that, saw a lot of Puerto Ricans. So it wasn't that I was completely, disconnected to that, but for the most part, you're speaking English, you're exchanging, cultures and smells and food and et cetera, that is not dear and near to you. And being in that room and, the sounds, the smells, the rhythms, the music, just, the whole thing just reverberated all this emotion. And I fell in love with the event and the, the whole gestalt of it. And the fact that, if it was that significant to me, how important it is for a place like that to be able to have a venue to celebrate who we are as, and our culture, and who we are as people and as individuals and as, as creators. And yeah.
So perhaps it was a twofold epiphany, not just your own personal yearning and encounter, and to be able to experience that strong emotive moment, in elsewhere and away from Puerto Rico, but you also had the awareness of the people propitiating that moment. It seems to me you were aware as like, wow, I mean, somebody is doing this not just for me, but for a whole community of people here in Philadelphia. So did you become immediately like attached, or you started to go to Taller, or it took a little longer for you to get to become involved?
It took a little longer because I was in the middle of my internship, and
Busy.
covering, we were so-called covering the floor almost every other night. So it's 1 week, 1 day on and 1 day off, but as soon as as things eased off a little bit, I started to to come to meetings and became hooked up almost immediately. Yes.
And before we go, I really want to address, and I hope you can talk to us at length about Taller Puertorriqueño. But before we go there, then there is this quote unquote hiatus in your exile, right? Or whatever. And then you travel back to Puerto Rico, relocate actually rather to Puerto Rico in 1980, it says here, where you start practicing medicine in Naranjito, not so far from Ciales, at least less far than Philly. And so by then you are a doctor with your specialty in this new field that has become so prevalent, family practice. You're in Philly and you have a Puerto Rican community that you're somewhat exposed to as you're getting your feet wet in North American culture and such, becoming a dweller of Philly. And then you come back to Naranjito. What about that contrast, not just in medicine, in your feelings, in your outlook in general? What was that contrast like?
So, I mean, again, maybe what happens to many of us, I mean, my idea of coming to Philadelphia was not as a permanent situation, right? It was, I'm going to do my residency, maybe work a few years and come back. And that was, the idea. So when the opportunity arose and I, was part of a federal medical provider program called the National Health Service Corps. So I was a federal government employee, and the 5 towns of the mountain, Naranjito, Orocovis, Barranquita, Corozal, and Comerío, had a corporation called La Corporación de la Montaña that was trying to strengthen services in those 5 towns that that had a lot of disparity with health providing issues in Puerto Rico. Therefore, the federal government paid attention to that, and in Puerto Rico, this corporation got formed that was providing additional physicians, and with improved salaries, etc., that allowed many of us to work in that setting. So I went to Naranjito, and I chose Naranjito because actually I had family. Because actually my father grew up in Ciales, but he was born in Naranjito.
I see. Okay.
And he was born in Naranjito, and then he moved to Ciales when he was like 9 years old. And therefore, I had family in Naranjito. I had a cousin, and I had cousins and an aunt and an uncle. One of my father's oldest brothers lived in Naranjito. So that was it. That was the decision to move there, and then I really enjoyed my time working in Naranjito. It was special and unique. I was a medical director of the health center in the town, and it was a real, for a physician, a real experience of providing services, in a town setting that really connected me to the realities of the town of Naranjito. And I was, each one of the physicians in the health center had an area to cover primarily. Mine was primarily the town of Naranjito.
So what was the contrast? Because then I know in 84, or we know that in 84, you come back to Philadelphia, and there's that saying from Federico García Lorca, ya yo no soy yo, ni mi casa es ya mi casa. And I wonder to what extent, yes, you're going back to the heartland, to your father's, municipality. You are close to Ciales. You are serving. You're serving the island, the mountain region, and you're happy and having this experience and being useful, which is what any human being can aspire to. And but then you move back. So what's the contra, then did you miss Philadelphia? Were there things about the experience of Philly that you thought, well, I haven't explored it, I haven't finished that exploration, I have people or things I still need to address in Philly? If you could just, I don't want to pry, I just want, like, what was the...
Yeah. No, I mean, so on the one side, the contract that had brought me to Naranjito was ending. So I needed to choose another opportunity. But the thing that brought me back to Philadelphia is that the reality is that I had spent, 7-8 years that professionally were very important to me and had developed, networks and connections and relationships that were very important and very dear. And an opportunity opened that that was very attractive, and and it...
Is this the Germantown? Because now you're the director. When you came back, you became the medical director of Germantown Family Medicine Associates. So is this like again a community place, or is it like a fancy place? Or I mean, what about Germantown called you?
It was fancier than Naranjito's Health Center, but in a lot of ways it was very community based. It was considered a community hospital, so it's a small hospital, but it's a small hospital that had inpatients and
everything,
and had the comprehensive gamut of services. And it was very unique in the sense that in those days we still were, had the opportunity to really practice what, in my mind, family medicine was supposed to do, which is that you really are in charge as a primary physician of the patient from the time they come to see you in the office to the time when they're sick, and then if they get, sent home, you see them again in the office. So that kind of continuity of care, is a model that doesn't, exist anymore, but it still existed then. And it's what, made me fall in love with being a primary care physician. So I was able to do that, for another 25 years.
And then the other continuity, which is now we can delve full swing into Taller Puertorriqueño. Then in 85, you become the chair of the board of directors of this non-for-profit that you had basically, experienced as a resident, a non-for-profit that had started just very briefly before you arrived in Philadelphia the first time. And so now you are in a position, not a resident, like exhausted and stuff. You are heading a center, and then you become the chairperson of the Taller Puertorriqueño. So what was it like in the mid 80s when you become chairwoman of Taller Puertorriqueño?
So when I left in 81, right, in 80, that winter, Taller, was small, but it was, it was an organization, and it was, happening, and events were happening, et cetera, et cetera. When I came back 4 years later, it was almost defunct.
Okay.
And, so I get a desperate call from a friend, Socorro, who had been a board member when I had left before, and said, Carmen,
Socorro was asking for socorro.
We need to organize, otherwise Taller Puertorriqueño is going to disappear. The wonderful thing that was happening, that was keeping it alive, is that monies had been raised to remodel this property, and that project was happening. And the prior board had managed it, but at that particular moment there was a hiatus where there was nothing. So the board had resigned, nobody was taking over, there was no money. There wasn't even a board. So anyway, so we, so we get together, And the person that is most willing or raises her hand is the one that gets to be the chair of the board.
Isn't it more like the cartoons where everybody takes 2 steps back and you forget to step back, so you're left in the front?
Right. Anyway, yeah. So it was, it was a challenging time, but we started to meet and figure out, how do we organize ourselves and what are the steps we need to take to reinstitute, what reports needed to be completed. So, funding streams can be reactivated. What, who do we need to talk to make sure that the projects, continue to happen? And we were successful in doing that. And then, 6 months later, opened the building, kind of reestablished ourselves with a new building, and started to expand programs.
What an incredible labor, because it's an arch that spans from your coming back to quote unquote resuscitate Taller back in 85, and then you're chairperson till 99. And then once again, you jump into the fray and then you become executive director. So you've played, a very significant, it's like the second foundation of Taller, if you ask people like us on the outside. And I just want to go then very, briefly, because there's just so much to talk about. So the origin in a nutshell, and also the mission. So we can then address how that mission has kept evolving, how you have interpreted the mission in that second foundation, and what awaits that next Carmen Febo or Carmelo Febo or the next person that hopefully will also take up the mantle and continue this labor of love. So mission and origin and mission, 74.
So the people that started Taller Puertorriqueño were artists. They, they understood, that's right. They understood that one potential way of providing a framework for youth to connect to their heritage, and therefore use it as a stimulator and a magnet for kids to really start having aspirations and become engaged and get more motivated academically, et cetera, was through the arts. So, and not the arts in an abstract, right? But the arts about who they are as individuals, about, who they are as Puerto Ricans, about their origins, about, and a lot of that very early imagery was, about Taíno symbols and, Bomba en Plena and
Los Reyes.
Los Reyes, right? So a lot, some of the very early larger projects that we produced was bringing Haciendo Punto en Otro Son to Philadelphia. Was there was an oral history project. There was a big deal where young kids interviewed first generation Puerto Rican in the community. So it was that, and it was part of that. It was the early 70s, right? It was that influence of the Young Lords and the 60s and all of that political activism during the 60s and that spilled over into the 70s. And Taller started in 74 with a number of other entities in Philadelphia that started around that same time, a number of other organizations. So Taller started as a program of Aspira, and very soon the organizers realized that they had a concept and an idea to become an independent entity. So then it becomes the nonprofit Taller Puertorriqueño. That early beginning was about training youth in the arts. It was a silk screening workshop that produced posters and T-shirts and, about events, but also just about Puerto Rican culture, right? About, lots of Taino symbols, imagery, the coquille, making all of those cultural connections. And then, when we restarted, we had to figure out, and it also did shows, but it didn't really have a gallery. It just did exhibitions. When we started to reorganize, it became very clear that because we didn't have, a lot of staff or whatever, we needed to come up with an activity that had enough of a presence, but that either was able to be done with, volunteers and not require a lot of staffing to take care of. So we said, well, if we come up with a space for exhibitions, once you mount an exhibition, the exhibition is there, it's a program, it's an active program, and you change it 2 or 3 months later, right? So we had the store had a person managing the store. On the second floor, we had the gallery, and the organization was open with one person.
Amazing.
And then we identified this incredibly wonderful, dynamic executive director who was an incredible executive director for the first 14 years. And Johnny then started, with very small.
What's his full name? Johnny
Irizarry. Johnny Irizarry.
Right.
And there's an interesting story that that is coming to full circle very soon as well about Johnny. But anyway, so we are able to identify Johnny as a person that can take then the leadership, because until then we were just the board was really kind of managing what was happening. And then Johnny then starts diversifying programs. So the exhibition program becomes, a mainstay of but then we know, right, that the early Taller was an education program for youth. So Johnny started, education programs during the summer, and then that extended, to after school programs during the year. And little by little, that element of education to youth has become, almost 50% of the work that we do, because, in our mission that you wanted to hear about. I mean, if we are about preserving, promoting, and stimulating, the development and the vitality and the creativity of Puerto Rican culture, we need to train the youth. We need to engage the youth in that process. And then at the same time, there's a whole community that is devoid of these cultural elements and these cultural celebrations. So those become the other programs that we've developed, which are programs that involve adults. Whether they're panels or festivals or, some involve both, right? Parents and kids in the Three Kings celebration, or.
Well, let me just say that I have a quote here, something that we've picked up from you that I would like to read. You say that an understanding that came out of our activism and that came out through our experience over the past 40 years is that kids develop a much better grounding when they connect to that heritage and that cultural space, which is what I'm hearing is that first the workshop, the art is like education in an informal way by doing, and that kept people busy. Then, all of a sudden the exhibition space is a way to grapple with the dearth of funds or staffing, which is always such a challenge for non-for-profits, whether they be ethnic like ours or any's. And then next thing, a more focused, slightly more resources to go into education, in a broader context than workshop. But for all of this, the main partner, the elephant in the China closet, is always the community, the people around, whether we attract them, repel them, whether they're interested or don't want anything to do. And in the case of Taller and of your stewardship of Taller, it seems that there has been a very happy, coexistence, not to mention synergy, not to mention symbiosis. So let's talk about, North Philadelphia, middle of the 1980s, when the reboot took place, and sketch us a picture of North Philadelphia, where Taller is situated, middle 80s, because as we know, a lot of Puerto Ricans, a lot of our communities, the so-called people of color of today, right, we're experiencing a very difficult time in the middle of the 80s. Several things came about, including a crack epidemic. Then we have AIDS all over the place. Then we have the mass incarceration just took off a life of its own. One single parent family, mostly on the shoulders of women, particularly Puerto Rican women, Latina women, African American women, you name it. So what's North Philadelphia like at this point when you are doing the reboot of Taller Puertorriqueño?
So I'm gonna, talk about that time, and unfortunately, there's a lot of that time that continues to today. Today, this community is still the poorest in the city of Philadelphia, and Philadelphia being the poorest, major city of the United States. So I just need to put that into context, which in a lot of ways then makes, the success that we've had in not only sustaining but making Taller grow almost like a miracle, because it is doing it in the poorest of the poorest city of the United States. But having said that, the challenges and the vision, to me, and not just I, obviously everybody involved with Taller has always had a big commitment and a centrality about the importance of the arts in the quality of life of our community, and in the, in that sense of well-being, in that sense of being who we are, in that sense of celebrating, in that sense of, internalizing our own identity and celebrating that, right? And therefore, our roots are very much in the community. There, when we started to discuss, the need to a new building, et cetera, there was no consideration to moving the Taller anywhere else. It had to stay in the heart of where we are.
That's wonderful. That's so important because, it's necessary, really.
Yes, right. So, and the thing, as you say, that feels like a symbiosis, yes, because, one story that I also tell is that we had this wonderful mosaic artist that was working with our kids, and he had the wonderful idea of, because we started to refer to Taller as el corazón cultural del barrio, right? which is, and that, that phrase sort of, has become part of, the organic thing that Taller is, right? And when we redesigned this mural that was going to be in front of, the old building, the old education building, he thought of building a huge ceramic heart, sort of in the entrance of the old building. And when he was building it, people would stop, put their hand on the heart and touch their own heart. I mean, that's the significance, right? That's the, so we're dealing with something that is very dear to people, right? The the idea of culture, the practices of culture, how culture brings us together, how culture is part, like in my family, like my father singing, singing with all of us, out of tune and whatever, but it made the time go, and it kept us together, and it brought us together. It's it's that adhesiveness, right? It's that element that creates an identity of this organization and the community that we are within.
And what's the town hall? I mean, I have a million things that I want to bring up, and and when we're talking things, the time just whiles away. What is the town hall mechanism? Because all of our institutions, some with more success than others. So yeah, you have a board, you have the executive, which you are the executive. What is the town hall? Is it like an informal thing? I mean, so there's people putting their hands on the heart. There is people. What's the town hall aspect? Meaning, like when it goes beyond the board and you as the executive, people come informally and hang out, and they're just talking out there in the bookstore, or is it the exhibitions? Like when you have a lot of people and the ideas or the visions or the future, is it a formal matrix for town hall, or it just happens in the Taller Puertorriqueño brand of organization?
It's a little bit of everything, because I mean, classes for kids are sort of structured, right? I mean, they come after school and they choose classes, and they have teachers, and they and then they produce work, and that work at the end of the semester is exhibited, and we invite parents, and there are events where we have formal conversations and very difficult conversations sometimes about whatever, the environment, or the situation of Puerto Rico, or something happening in the community, or violence, or police brutality, or whatever, and those are very very important conversations, and then there's parties that are celebratory. So when like when you were here and exhibited your work, and we did an artist reception, and it was fun, right? It was, people came and saw your work, but then they hung and they enjoyed themselves, and they we had a little bit of food and whatever, and music and whatever, and it was a party.
I want to say, I just want to, Doctora Febo and the good folks at Taller Puertorriqueño invited me for an incredible exhibition back, was the early 2000s, right? Or early 2000s, called Rumberas en el Jardín, Rumberas in the Garden. And I painted it specifically for them. And it was, I met some pleneros, I got some CDs. I mean, the whole thing was a variant, its own Philly variant of what I had experienced, to a certain extent, different, of course, in Taller Boricua here in New York, perhaps in New Haven at some point, with the Puerto Rican community that used to go in and out of Casa Cultural Judía de Burgos at Yale. And it was a very special moment in my career. So I experienced this firsthand, the love, the participation, the grassroots. There were fancy, people and people from the community, and everything in a great mishmash. So yes, I can vouch for that, and it was incredible. But anyway, going back, so then I wanted to touch on the, I get it.
We do this, this huge festival that this year is going to be, year number 36, which attracts thousands of people, and it's a street fair. It's called Feria del Barrio. And this year, it's going to bring, this whole comparsa from Ponce.
When do you usually do the Feria del Barrio?
It's a Sunday in September. This year, it's going to be Sunday, September 19. Okay,
Feria del Barrio, Sunday, September 19. But I wanted to, Sunday, September 19. So those of you that are listening to this and are going to go to Philadelphia on September, maybe you can go on the 19th and check out Feria del Barrio this year, because it's going to be explosive, given that COVID is starting to let up and people are eager to connect and commune, right? Anyway, but what I wanted to bring up, listening to this, and before we go into perhaps what's coming, the future, you have mentioned that you might be stepping down, and I wanna talk about that too. But the archive aspect. So in all of our organizations, also our archive, if you don't have a lot of space, also like, archiving the works or whatever it is you archive. What's the relationship of your relationship as Taller, as the board, you the director, the community? What do you hold on to? How do you hold on to it, and why? Meaning, and I'm talking specifically, not broadly philosophical. Well, we keep on these programs, or we keep on prints from way back, or we're holding on to the future. The students' work is what we save one from each. Like, is there, or there is no archive because it's about what we're doing? What is the archive? Or
well, so we again, I mean, some of the things that happened in the organization obviously happens very organically, right? So we start a very important project that happened very early was the oral history project that we mentioned. That oral history project, which is now 35, 40 years old, is it's conversations of young kids, 16, 15, 17, 18-year-olds with first generation people that came, and were living in Philadelphia at the particular time. The value, the social value of that.
That's the archive. That is the archive.
Right. So that is a piece of gold that we have in our archive. Other than that, we have, papers that students have written in universities as part of their dissertation or whatever that we are collecting. We have, as you mentioned, yes, every card and every invitation and brochure, articles that have been written about Philadelphia, articles that have been written about events in Philadelphia. So it's a collection of events and occurrences in our community that mostly have to do with the Puerto Rican community, but with others, that are part of the milieu in which we operate, which is Dominicans and Central Americans and others.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Our context as Latinos and Caribbean peoples in a broader northeastern diaspora, right?
Yeah, and the value of these archives, and in Philadelphia, the Historical Society did kind of an inventory of those archives, and there's 1,000 all over town, right? In people's basements, and this and that and the other thing, and when you look at the content. And what we've been able to do, and maybe now it would even be a little bit better because we now have a dedicated space and we have a dedicated person that is taking care of it and is doing a great job of organizing it and so on and so forth. We have been able to do a project with the Historical Society where we looked at the migration of Puerto Ricans into the area and have been able to develop a whole website about that history of the last 40 years. And that is part of our archives. So little by little, that seed that was planted and started to collect materials is evolving into something, very complex and unique.
Dr. Febo, sorry to interrupt. What's the link? So people that would like to at least that website. What's
if they go to HSP Neighbors, Vecinos, it will link them to the site.
Okay, but like the general
Historical Society of Pennsylvania, HSP Neighbors.
Okay.
If you put that on the Google link, it will connect you to the site.
Because it is very significant then, from workshop and education in a informal context, exhibitions, we're talking education with a more broad program, And now the fact that, and you say it with so much pride, which I can imagine, about archives, somebody more dedicated, and the ordering of these materials for easier access, for digital reproduction and such. So that is indeed quite a feat. And I wanted to just segue on that and go into two things. We understand that you have expressed a desire to retire, or that you might be moving on. And so let's talk about that. 1 second. So like we were saying, sorry for the interruption, you are moving on, or you've expressed an interest to leave Taller. Talk to us a little bit about that decision and what lies ahead, both for you personally. What are you looking to do? You're such a doctor, the head of an influential nonprofit in the Puerto Rican arts and culture, right? Milieu in Philadelphia. And then, so you gotta probably, I wonder what's your next plan? And also, what do you see for Taller, or what are the moves being made to foster a strong continuity with this amazing period?
So, Miguel, I think, I've dedicated to Taller, 30 plus years, right? And one of the things that I've observed and is, many times what you see is that these transitions are very difficult for organizations, particularly for transitions that involve a leader that has been, in charge for a long time.
Yep.
Right? And our organizations, we're a small organization. In the corporate sector, you have, the assistant to the assistant to the assistant. It's like Pedro Pietri's poem, the assistant to the assistant. And therefore, there is always a pipeline of people that can take, that can move into that position. That is not our reality. So we've been planning for this, because I'm 74 years old. And it's time. It's time for, the work that has been done to this point to continue under, if not a new vision, a different vision, somebody that can bring fresh energy and fresh, inspiration and fresh colors and, but Taller is in a very good position. As I mentioned and touched before, the success of being able to complete an $11.5 million state-of-the-art building in the heart of the poorest community in the poorest city of the United States is a feat, and has a feat that has been taken to success. And that success is being felt now. I joke and I tell people, I was the same Carmen Febo before the building and after the building. But all of a sudden, after the building, I'm this miracle. Well, it's the same, it's the same Taller, it's the same, it's the same institution, it's the same energy. But, I guess there is something concrete that people can see.
No, yo creo que before Taller, before the building, you were Carmen. Now you're Doña Carmen.
There you go. There you go. So, so anyway, so Taller is in a very good position. It's in a strong financial position. It's in a very good, and there is a lot that is happening moving forward. So I don't know if you know, but Inter-American University, and this is something that, should have happened 2.5 years ago, if it weren't because of 2 storms and earthquakes and now COVID, wants to establish a branch in the East Coast. They attempted in New York, it didn't work. Then they looked at Philadelphia and they chose Taller Puertorriqueño.
Amazing.
And we are hoping and looking at September for that to happen. The space is identified, it has been remodeled, it's ready to go. except waiting for this damn COVID to allow for students to be able to, come to class and so on and so forth. So
And the search for your replacement, is that ongoing?
That's happening, and the finances to make sure that there's enough money and all of those things are in place, right?
Incredible.
And right now we're also in a position where we may get donated a building that is going to be next to where we are right now. That if Inter-American comes and grows quickly, which is the reality that they are experiencing in Orlando.
Okay.
There is immediate, there's already identified space for them
Room
to
for
grow.
growth.
Because the space that we have is fairly small. It accommodates, 2 classrooms, 30 students each and whatever. But if there's a need to grow very quickly, we've already identified the space. These communities, right, Miguel? I mean, the anchoring that an institution like Inter-American University, not only because of what it represents and what it can do for youth in this community by providing a venue where they can study after high school. That alone is
Right.
is big. But the cultural identity of an institution like Inter-American University, is going to solidify this, this situation and this relationship for years to come. And I can't wait. I mean, I wish I was 25 years younger and I could see it happen, because it's going to be big.
Well, and it also has some counterparts. Everything is different, but my respect. I mean, first of all, kudos on behalf of all of us toiling on the community and cultural field, particularly those of us that are in Puerto Rico, Puerto Ricans. But it reminds me of Inquilino Boricuas en Acción in Boston, which it sounds like you're getting ready for a campus, or you set the stage for a campus to appear. So that's very, very exciting. And the whole feed, I really look forward to hearing who will carry on this torch that you have so diligently borne for such a long time, and also with the remarkable thing that it's ending up. It's ending up, not with a transition turmoil that is so characteristic of a lot of our transitions, like you mentioned. But moving along, because all good things must come to pass, and we're almost at the end of our tertulia. Doctora Febo, I want to bring up to the attention of those of us that don't know that you are also have been quite involved for good reasons, because of Taller and everything else, and in social justice and in advocating for voters' rights. So I want to end now that that's such a hot topic issue, and it's going this way and that way. That you were, I just want to bring up that you were a plaintiff in the Pennsylvania Supreme Court case that overturned the state's congressional district map due to partisan gerrymandering. So I would like to end with you just briefly commenting on that and encouraging us and others to sort of keep vigilant and to sort of be aware of how important it is to become engaged and to stop funny business with the voting districts.
Well, one of the things that that I like to see, and that is part of the goals of the Taller as an organization, is that we're here because we are in the community, and we're a member of the community, and as a member of the community, we partake in all of the issues and all of the struggles. And when Maria happened, Taller was right there, I was right there, and we worked really, really, really hard. We raised, over $450,000 to help, with the situation of Maria in Puerto Rico. Again, reminding people that this is the poorest of the poorest community. So with voting, I mean, who are the people that are being gerrymandered out?
Us.
Of color, right? It's us. It's who are the ones that are underrepresented? Who are the ones that that don't go to vote because they don't feel like they're connected? It's us. So when the opportunity arose and I could be a plaintiff, I said, count me in. It's issues of race, right? I mean, it's understanding that we are a multiracial society. We as Puerto Ricans, I mean, how can I say that I'm not Afro-Latina? How can I say that I'm not Afro-Taína? How can I say that I'm not, whatever, have a mixture of European blood and black blood and indigenous blood and everybody's blood? So, I mean, it's just ingrained into being an organization that understands that its role in the arts is a transformative role, and that it needs to be also a social rights and social involved in all of these struggles that we as individuals have to be involved in order to make this a better society, and that the kids that come behind us have a better world to live in, whether they're environmental or, racial or economics or, yes.
And I don't think there's a better way to end this than with that amazing statement. But I have one last bit of curiosity, Doctora Febo. So what next? What are you thinking of doing? Are Naranjito, Ciales, or bust? We're coming back to San Juan or Philly and check out the shows at Taller Puertorriqueño when they pop up? What's next?
I don't, I've been planning for this transition, and that's been the focus. And and I'm here until October, right? So there's still a lot of work to be done, and I don't have anything in particular except with more time to my hand. I do want to spend more time in Puerto Rico, and when I go to Puerto Rico, I spend at best 10 days or 2 weeks at most, and and when I leave, it's like a part of my heart stretches out, and and I'll be able to spend much more time with family and enjoying and I and travel, and I am involved in a number of things that I will continue to be involved with. And once your heart is into these kinds of work, it's not going to be completely severed, right? In some way or another. But the exact composition is still not clear.
Well, thank you very much for your time. For those of us that are listening, for those of you that are listening, la doctora Carmen Febo, the executive director of Taller Puertorriqueño in Philly. Check out Taller Puertorriqueño in Philly. Remember, there's a big shindig now in September, and let's all check it out personally in Philly. Muy buenas noches. Gracias, doctora Febo.
I hope you can come to Philly and see us again.
I would
Take care. Thank you so much, Miguel.
Muy buenas tardes. Buenas noches.